Picture descending toward the ocean floor in a sealed glass capsule. You'd expect to find tiny fish, maybe an anglerfish if you're unlucky. What's actually waiting down there is dramatically different. Sharks that dwarf great whites, squid heavier than a car, insects scaled up into something genuinely monstrous. This is deep sea gigantism. And the strange part is that it works completely backward from what basic logic would predict. Zero sunlight and almost no food should force animals to shrink down and conserve every scrap of energy. Instead, the deep ocean does the exact opposite, taking small creatures and making them massive, and taking already large creatures and making them genuinely gigantic. So what's actually happening down there that turns biology inside out like this? Start with the big fin squid, one of the most disturbing examples of this entire phenomenon. Its fins are wildly oversized relative to its body, stretched so far that the animal can actually be wider than it is tall, something you won't find in any shallow water squid. But most of its visible size isn't even body mass, it's the arms. Look closely and you'll notice distinct 90-degree bends, like permanently locked elbows, completely unlike the smooth tentacles of any surface-dwelling squid. At depths approaching 15,000 feet, sprinting after prey simply isn't an option. Food is scarce enough that every single movement carries a real energy cost. So the big fin evolved into something closer to a living tripwire. It doesn't hunt at all. It drifts motionless, letting arms stretching over 20 feet hang in the darkness like a passive net, covering enormous vertical area while expending almost no energy whatsoever. Despite how unsettling they look, there's barely any muscle in those trailing arms, and there's no evidence they pose any real danger to a human. The genuinely unsettling part is different. Nearly every big fin squid ever recovered has been a juvenile. If juveniles are already stretching to 20 feet, we have no real idea what a fully mature adult actually looks like. But if gigantism only existed to build better fishing nets, every deep sea animal would look like floating string. They don't. This is a response to something much bigger than one feeding strategy. Take the oarfish, the longest bony fish on Earth, capable of stretching past 36 feet longer than 3 cars parked bumper to bumper, made entirely of fish. For centuries, sailors who glimpsed one near the surface assumed they'd seen a genuine sea serpent, and looking at one, that reaction makes complete sense. A bright red dorsal fin running like a mane down an impossibly long body, weighing over 600 pounds despite its slender profile. The oarfish isn't using its length to trap prey the way the big fin does, it uses size to become a living antenna. Oarfish have been observed hanging perfectly vertical in open water, completely motionless. By being 30 feet long and oriented straight up and down, a single animal can simultaneously monitor multiple depth layers at once. In the deep ocean, food doesn't typically move sideways, it falls from above. Being extremely long means an oarfish can detect pressure changes or chemical signals from prey 10 feet above its head or 10 feet below its tail without moving a single muscle. So why doesn't every fish at the surface adopt this same strategy if it's this efficient? Because the deep sea removes the one factor that keeps most animals small everywhere else: competition. On a coral reef, being a slow 30-foot ribbon of meat is a death sentence. A shark or orca would have the easiest meal of its life. At the surface, you survive by staying small enough to hide or fast enough to escape. There's always something hungrier nearby. In the deep, who exactly are you running from? The abyss is remarkably empty. There simply aren't large numbers of predators patrolling that darkness. For an oarfish or a big fin squid, there's almost zero evolutionary pressure to be fast, because once you cross a certain size threshold, you become too large for the handful of predators down there to bother engaging with at all. Without anything actively hunting them, these animals were free to abandon speed entirely and optimize purely for efficiency. This is the actual secret behind deep sea gigantism. Larger bodies are fundamentally better at not starving. That sounds backward, but it's a real biological trade-off. A bigger body supports a dramatically slower metabolism, meaning it costs less energy per pound of tissue to simply stay alive. A small fish runs a high metabolism and can starve within days without a meal. These deep-sea giants function more like biological batteries, storing enormous nutrient reserves, beating their hearts slowly, moving minimally, and surviving months between feeding events because their entire biology is built around endurance rather than speed. They're giants, mostly gentle ones. Not always, though. The giant squid stretches up to 45 feet and weighs nearly half a ton, and there is nothing remotely gentle about it. It possesses the largest eyes in the entire animal kingdom, genuinely the size of dinner plates, built to capture the faintest possible trace of light in absolute darkness. To capture prey that actually fights back, the giant squid weaponized its entire body. 2 massive feeding tentacles function as biological grappling hooks, lined with suckers ringed in serrated chitin teeth designed to dig into flesh and prevent escape. Once secured, prey gets dragged toward a beak harder than bone, fully capable of severing something the size of a turtle. So why did this particular animal evolve into an active hunter instead of a passive drifting net like the bigfin? Because the abyss isn't entirely empty, and if you're going to hunt something capable of fighting back, being a passive net gets you killed. You have to become a weapon instead. But the bigger driver of its extreme size isn't prey capture at all. It's the fact that the giant squid is one of the only deep-sea animals with a genuine natural rival, the sperm whale. Whales dive thousands of feet into total darkness specifically to hunt these squid, creating a biological arms race that has run continuously for millions of years. To survive that pressure, squid were forced to grow larger, developing thicker mantles and more powerful beaks to resist a multi-ton mammalian predator. The circular battle scars regularly found across sperm whale faces aren't accidents. They're evidence of combat that happened miles below the surface, in total darkness, that no human has ever directly witnessed. You'd assume crushing deep-sea pressure would make being enormous the worst possible evolutionary strategy. A massive body should simply collapse under that stress instantly. This is actually one of the biggest misconceptions about the deep ocean. Pressure doesn't crush an organism that's composed of essentially the same material as the surrounding water. These animals are mostly water and oil internally, and because liquids don't meaningfully compress, the pressure inside their cells matches the pressure outside almost perfectly. They're not resisting the ocean, they're functioning as an extension of it. In fact, the deep sea may be the easiest possible environment on Earth in which to become a giant. On land, your primary enemy isn't pressure, it's gravity, a constant structural tax on your skeleton. The larger you get on land, the more energy gets wasted, simply holding your own body upright. An earthworm that somehow grew to 40 feet would be crushed by its own weight before it could even move. In water, buoyancy eliminates that tax entirely. Because the surrounding water supports an animal's mass directly, deep-sea creatures gain total structural freedom, which is exactly why soft-bodied giants dominate down there while rigid, heavily boned giants remain rare. They simply don't need dense skeletal structure to stay upright, allowing genuinely massive frames to exist using almost no maintenance energy at all. Hard-shelled animals can still experience this effect, just less dramatically. The giant isopod, a distant relative of the common garden pill bug, proves this in an almost absurd way. A typical squid runs 1 to 2 feet long and weighs a couple of pounds. A giant squid reaches 45 feet and 700 pounds, roughly a 500 times increase in mass. Significant, but a garden pill bug weighs a tenth of a gram, while a giant isopod can weigh nearly 4 pounds, a 20,000 times increase in mass. Proportionally, that's equivalent to a house cat evolving into something the size of a blue whale. Unlike a giant squid, which would collapse almost instantly if brought to the surface, giant isopods and the similarly oversized Japanese spider crab can survive surface pressure without issue. You can keep one in a standard aquarium tank. So why did they only reach this size specifically in the deep? Because in the abyss, you might go years without encountering a single meal. When something like a dead whale finally sinks to the seafloor, you need the physical capacity to gorge and store enough reserves to survive potentially a full decade until the next meal arrives. The isopod evolved into essentially a biological storage container capable of eating until visibly distorted in a single sitting. There are documented captive cases of these animals surviving 5 consecutive years without a single meal. A small body simply couldn't store enough reserve energy to survive that gap. Because deep ocean water is so cold, metabolism in these animals runs at near zero. They aren't burning meaningful energy just to exist, which means their cells aren't wearing down the way ours constantly do. And when you're not actively burning through your own biological systems, you end up living for an extraordinarily long time. A typical garden pill bug lives 2 to 3 years before reaching its natural limit. A giant isopod can live for decades, simply providing far more total time to keep growing. You're not necessarily a giant because of one specific mutation. You're a giant because you've had centuries available to slowly become one. Size, in many of these cases, is essentially a side effect of simply not dying. Nowhere is this more obvious than in the Greenland shark. Most people assume the great white sits at the top of shark size rankings. Eventually, the Greenland shark surpasses it, it just takes considerably longer. Reaching over 24 feet, growing at a rate of roughly half an inch per year, scientists have identified individuals estimated at approximately 400 years old. There are sharks alive in the deep right now that were born before the Industrial Revolution began. They don't even reach sexual maturity until roughly 150 years of age. Despite how compelling deep-sea gigantism is, it doesn't apply universally to everything down there. Most deep-sea life remains genuinely small. Gigantism only rewards a narrow set of biological strategies, scavengers that need massive storage capacity, ambush predators that benefit from staying motionless, and low competition specialists with no real reason to evolve speed. Outside those specific categories, staying small remains the more aggressive survival strategy, allowing faster reproduction and the ability to survive on the small scraps the giants overlook entirely. Some species push miniaturization to the opposite extreme. In several anglerfish species, males have shrunk so dramatically that they've lost the ability to feed themselves entirely. Reduced to little more than a swimming set of nostrils and fins, whose sole purpose is locating a female, attaching permanently, and remaining small enough to avoid draining her energy reserves. And in the most extreme deep-sea regions, what scientists sometimes call biological deserts, available food is so minimal that the basic math required to sustain a giant body simply doesn't work, regardless of how efficient that body's metabolism might be. Put all of these factors together and deep-sea gigantism stops looking like a freak accident and starts looking like a near inevitability. Buoyancy removes the structural cost of having a massive body. Cold temperatures slow metabolism down into a process that can sustain growth across centuries rather than years. And a near total absence of predators removes any pressure to stay small or fast. It's tempting to look at these animals as the strange ones simply because they don't resemble anything you'd find at a beach. But the truth runs in the opposite direction. The surface ocean, full of violence, venom, and constant predation, is the genuinely chaotic environment. The deep ocean giants are simply animals perfectly built for the specific world they occupy, patient, efficient, and built to last centuries in a place that rewards exactly that.